just some, just from the perspective of the American Kratom Association, I know that there is a great frustration among some advocates in looking to see why we're seeing an increase, what appears to be an increase in the number of enforcement actions that are being taken by various jurisdictions, and that includes obviously the situation in California, but we're seeing it's equally true in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We're seeing a lot of Illinois towns do it. We see some in Mississippi, despite there being a Kratom Consumer Protection Act there. We're seeing some similar activity in a number of other local jurisdictions, including Massachusetts. So all of these things that are happening, people search for that answer. And sometimes the easy answer isn't the correct answer. The easy answer would be, oh, it's because of the attention that's been given to 7-OH products and the call for a ban. Therefore, the conclusion is that that's why we're seeing all of these bans. There is some truth, in my opinion, to the exposure of this issue and the what I would think the cumulative effect of the headlines and sometimes the stories. And from what I'm told among the media people, when I complain to them about the content of some of their stories, they say, we don't write the headlines. That's a different division. And the headline writers are looking for clickbait as much as they can do to make something controversial. And so that's the reality of some of what we confront in terms of messaging. And nowhere is that more crystallized than when we heard what happened in the state of Ohio, where Governor DeWine made the recommendation for scheduling of all kratom, not just 7-OH. And apparently he based it on two factors. Impossible for us to know how much weight he gave to each one. But one of those factors was the news reports that were published following the announcement by Secretary Kennedy and Commissioner McCary about their wanting to ban 7-OH, and lost in the nuance of the headline. It was absent from the headline and even the news stories, was that the Commissioner McCary went to great pains, not only in the November 29th, I'm sorry, the July 29th press conference, unprecedented, where you have the Secretary of HHS and the FDA Commissioner both addressing this issue of 7-OH products. But the clearly Commissioner McCary went out of his way to say we are not focused on natural kratom leaf products, but the governor in Ohio didn't see it that way, didn't have that perspective, didn't see the nuance of it, and so when his recommendation was made, based on what he read in newspaper reports, and politicians sometimes do that, coupled with a family who was speaking loudly in his ear about their claim that their child had obviously died from a kratom overdose. And while the facts of that case are unclear to us because we haven't been provided with any information, we know consistently that the decision and the conclusion by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, by HHS itself, articulated in a letter by Secretary Becerra under the Biden administration, and then, of course, the FDA's newfound position on kratom, all consistently say that kratom deaths are rare, and when they do occur, it's typically associated with polydrug use or adulterated products. Now, with that proviso and caveat, the lag between that conclusion that is drawn from evidence and data available to the federal agencies is not catching up with what some of these decisions that are being made on the ground. And we're going to talk in more detail when we get to California. But I think that for those that like to point their finger and say, oh, well, this is all because of the AKA support for a ban on 7-OH, that therefore here is the conclusion that is true. Just as an example, the state of Connecticut in the last days of their legislative session had not yet seen any public advocacy for a 7-OH ban, and yet they included kratom in it, and it's because of the content of material like the Mayo Clinic, and that it was cited by the sponsors up there, where the Mayo Clinic says that kratom is a very dangerous substance, highly addictive and deadly. And the truth of the matter there are two things. One is the Mayo Clinic has never conducted a penny's worth of research at the Mayo Clinic. And so they are simply repeating what the FDA says. And the second point on that is that the FDA has an agreement with the Mayo Clinic and Yale University to do distribution of the content of the FDA's pronouncements about various things, regulatory issues, including about kratom. So it's not surprising that you would see the Mayo Clinic saying this, but of course we see that repeated, and it's just like you get that little test about how rumors spread with kids in elementary school, and you tell the one and you let them whisper it all the way down, and you see the outcome at the end of the chain being significantly different than what the start of the content of that message was. That's happening in the kratom industry. It is inevitable that as long as we have this tension that exists in the scientific community about whether kratom is safe or not, and I would ask everyone to take a look at the article that was published in the Wall Street Journal about the addiction recovery centers and some of the corruption that exists among some of those addiction recovery centers. And I raise this only to illustrate the point of how information and motives can sometimes illuminate as to why things are happening. That particular Wall Street Journal article merely looks at a part of the industry where they cite the fact that money has driven levels of corruption in the addiction recovery center, where they're more interested in filling a bed than they are in actually delivering treatment. And they make an interesting case in the investigative report that was done. Only relevant to us, relevance it has to us, is that we consistently see the addiction recovery community come up and talk about in public hearings and with the press, saying, "Oh, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of kratom patients that are kratom addicted that are coming into our facilities for treatment." And of course, when you connect the money motive to it, that's significant. And more importantly, when you look at what is the appropriate level and the intensity of care that is needed by someone who arrives at the particular recovery center and has to make a decision about the kind of care that they need, and the triage of exactly what they're doing. And typically, where the money does corrupt people is, well, we've got a person here, we've got an empty bed, we can bill their insurance company, so let's slap them in that bed and let's just start treating them. And without that triage of what is the appropriate level and the intensity of care that's needed. To the extent that that's happening, and I suspect that there may be an opportunity for us to investigate that further, I think it's unfair for those people to come up as advocates for their revenue and try to interpose on that the issue with respect to the dangers of kratom and the addiction liability of kratom, because there's no evaluation presented by them about when their client presents themselves, comes to the door, as to what other issues that they're dealing with, including polydrug use and adulterated products. And in this case, it could be 7-OH product. But back to the point about whether or not it was the focus on 7-OH that has driven some of these bans. I think you also have to look at California. California is the Department of Health started their battle against kratom, claiming that under California statutes that they are obligated, because the FDA has determined that kratom is not an approved dietary ingredient or a dietary supplement under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And they're right about that. The interesting way that California law is constructed gives a pathway for the Department of Health to rely upon a pronouncement by the FDA in order to go after kratom. And we've been fighting in California for 2.5 years in order to get them to stand down. And their increase in actual enforcement actions that's ramped up significantly is as much a part about the failure of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act 2 sessions ago, and the department seeing that there was some interest in it. And I went and testified at a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing about the health department's actions, and I attributed it, in part at least, to the issues that were arising around how much enforcement money that they were asking as a part of the legislation. And the amount of money they were asking for was astronomical. it appeared that this is one of those cases where the management of the health department saw an opportunity in order to build a larger number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, employees, and more money for enforcement, including laboratories and other things. And and as I walked out of the hearing, the staffer for the appropriations committee followed me out and he said, "You haven't seen this yet." And he handed me the report from the Department of Health where they were asking for millions and millions of dollars in order to increase the resources that they need, including personnel and equipment and labs and that kind of thing. Now, there's always the tension between a state legislature and the regulatory bodies because the regulatory bodies always believe that the legislators shortchange them, and there's some truth to that. That there's always a lag between resources that are needed in order to accomplish the specific requirements of a statute and the money catching up with it. And we're dealing with that in a number of states where we're finding that the registration fees that we embed into our Kratom Consumer Protection Acts are not sufficient to supply the revenue that the enforcement agency or regulatory body believes that they need in order to properly protect the public. And so we get caught up in that tension that naturally exists between these agencies. And I believe in Florida, when the Department of Agriculture presented their fiscal report, they were asking for astronomical amounts of money, but it was a penalty to the legislature for failing to provide a lot of the resources they believe they need when the Florida legislature passed hemp regulations. And so it was part of a punishment back and forth. And we became the victims of it because we're asking for appropriate regulations where the regulatory body accepts registrations, processes those registrations, and then when it's appropriate to enforce against a product that's not on the market, which is driven by complaints, it doesn't require an army of people to go out and actually go to every shop that sells kratom in the state. And so we have these constant tensions. But to the point that those that think it's convenient now to try to criticize the American Kratom Association and say, "Oh, well, if they hadn't raised the issue, then we wouldn't be fighting this battle right now." And I don't think that's accurate. I know it's not accurate, but I know that it's hard to rebut it. And I know that for those that are critics of saying, "Why are you doing this?" particularly those who are great supporters of the 7-OH industry, they want to make this, the AKB the patsy for what's happening now. There is one reason and only one reason why 7-OH has become such a big deal in the marketplace today. And that is that 7-OH manufacturers ignored their legal obligation when they entered the marketplace, and that happened in the latter part of 2023, when they're required by federal law to have a reasonable basis for safety based on the conditions of use. Now, what that means is that prior to the entry, the manufacturer has an affirmative statutory obligation to be able to demonstrate that they have evidence and data that proves that their product is safe to be consumed by consumers under the labeling conditions that they provide. That's a standard that is met by dietary supplement manufacturers across the board and consistently is met. And it is not as tough a standard as one might think because you just have to have that reasonable basis. What we discovered is from the lead scientist, and I've been criticized, rightly so, by mispronouncing his name. I was calling him Kampmeyer. It's Kampmeyer. Dr. Kampmeyer appeared at a leadership symposium for the American Kratom Association in Miami in January of this year. And he participated on a panel on 7-OH where we were trying to get a better understanding of what the actual evidence and data that was being used by the 7-OH community to enter the marketplace because we saw this proliferation of products that called 7-OH kratom, something that the 7-OH industry had committed to us they would not do, and we saw the proliferation of the actual serving size recommendations that was going from 7.5 milligrams, which is on its face not justified, up to astronomical levels. And we saw that the packaging was so horrendous when it comes to appealing to children. Smurfs, confectionery ice cream cones. This is the kind of thing that obviously was of great concern to us. And Dr. Kampmeyer came and he stated on the panel, and we have his recording of it and a transcript, where he said that the 7-OH industry did not have in 2023, prior to market entry, any of the scientific evidence and data that would be required in order to enter the marketplace. Zero. And he said, we're working hard to catch up. So this is in 2025, a year and a half after market entry, where there had been an explosion of 7-OH products. There was a significant sales volume and revenue that was generated by the illicit marketing that was going on, misleading kratom consumers into thinking that they were actually purchasing and using a pure kratom leaf product, which they were not. And that's what accounted for the problems that we were having. And when Dr. Kentmeyer said that, and he said, we're looking to have the evidence that we need and the scientific evidence that we need by mid 2025 or in 2026. One of the observers in the audience, who himself was a former FDA official and an attorney and a pharmacist, challenged that position and said, well, if what you're saying is true, then these products are not illegal to be on the market. And that's the plain fact. Now, the all of the explanations, and they're voluminous, of the 7-OH industry, saying, oh, yeah, same thing as when kratom came on the market. Here's the difference. That reasonable basis of safety that's required under federal law was accounted for when kratom products came onto the market, because there was at that time dozens and dozens of peer-reviewed published articles about the safety profile of kratom. Now there are hundreds and hundreds of them that are available now. But at the time of market entry, there was sufficient reasonable basis for evidence and evidence and data supporting the safety of kratom products. So that argument goes out the window. The 7-OH people like to say, oh, it's the same thing. It is not. Affirmatively, it is not, because here's the truth. There is today not a single peer-reviewed published article that supports the safety profile of kratom that is available and can be assessed reasonably by regulators about the safety profile of 7-OH. There is a growing body of evidence that expresses significant concerns about the pharmacology of 7-OH, about its binding affinity, about the way it in fact hits people very quickly, depending on the format of the product. Lots of issues here that really underpin the concern that has been raised by the FDA and HHS. And I can tell you, there has never been in my 40, 50 years working in Washington, D.C. on issues related to dietary supplements and drugs, not seen any press conference held jointly by the HHS secretary and the FDA commissioner recommending scheduling. And the point that Commissioner McCary made, and he has repeated it, was that we're not focused on natural kratom leaf products. We're focused on these chemically manipulated opioids, which is the effect that a 7-OH product has. And they are, and I know that there's lots of arguments to say, well, we now have sold 1 billion servings of 7-OH and we're not seeing any significant adverse events. Well, that bubble got popped here in the last couple of weeks, and with reports of deaths that are attributable to 7-OH products. Now, whether or not they prove, once the evidence and data is fully examined, to be solely caused by 7-OH, it will be an interesting issue. And I get that 7-OH people responding back saying, oh, well, we're not sure that that's the case. We fight that battle on the kratom side as well. We want to make sure that any toxicology report, any autopsy report, accurately reflects what the cause of death is, and they should not mislabel or misappropriate the actual context of that tox screen to 7-OH or kratom, if in fact there are other substances that are involved that are more fairly implicated and assessed in the context of that report. But to say that there's not been a single report of any of these adverse events, that is no longer true. And look at the lag time that is necessary in our signaling systems in order to identify where this problem occurs. Up until a month and a half ago, or maybe 2 months ago now, the poison control centers did not differentiate between kratom and 7-OH. Today they do. And so you'll see more data that comes in that will more accurately allow for public policy officials to make an assessment of what the attributable substance is when it comes to decisions about calls to the poison control centers. And that, of course, is informative to public policymakers in the way that they evaluate the actual substances that they have a concern about. I think it's also true when you look at this evidence to look at the evidence and data presented in a toxicology report subject to an autopsy for a fatality. We need to look at those closely. Now we're seeing that medical examiners and coroners are testing more carefully for the presence of 7-OH. There is a technical issue that involves, depending on the timing of the autopsy and when the 7-OH product might have been consumed, assuming that it is implicated here, as to whether or not it is present because of its instability of the metabolite in the bloodstream. It may be gone by the time the testing is actually done, and all that will be left for a coroner medical examiner is trace amounts of metrogenine in the bloodstream, because we know that in 7-OH products there are trace amounts of metrogenine. As we know in a pure kratom leaf product, there are trace amounts of 7-OH. And while there's lots of discussion about, oh, we found new ways in order to do the oxidization process that are not quite as harsh as using the same chemicals that you use to shock your backyard pool, it was the largest manufacturer of 7-OH raw materials who published that in a social media post, that that's what they use and justified as being no problem. Clearly, in order to get to the actual potency of 7-OH, where you flip the content of the product, and it's a simple equation. What is the majority of the product that you're selling? If you're selling it as a kratom product, and the majority of the content of the compounds in the product are metrogenine, then okay. Now look at 7-OH products. If the majority of the content of the product is 7-OH, then you have done something in order to generate that level of 7-OH. And you can argue all day long, and you can try to excuse it, but there's not adequate safety and data, safe evidence and data on safety that would justify market entry. And that's the pure fact of the matter. Uh, Now, what likely will happen once the shutdown in the government occurs, you're probably going to see a scheduling recommendation on a temporary basis. And I know the 7-OH people are saying, oh, no, it's no problem. We're going to have 2 to 3 years to evaluate by the DEA's recommendation. The DEA has two choices. One is they can do temporary scheduling, which is what they did in 2016 to Kratom itself. And what that says is that from the date of publication in the Federal Register, that official notice, 30 days later, without any public comment period and without any judicial review, that substance is classified as a Schedule 1 substance for a period of 2 years, with the possibility of extending to a third year. During that time period, then there can be an evaluation of the scientific evidence. If there's any credible evidence and data that documents the safety of the product, that could be evaluated in what would have to be a permanent scheduling evaluation done at the end of that 2 year period. The second choice for the DEA, and an unlikely one given the characterization made by the FDA and HHS in their analysis, the 8-factor analysis they provide to the DEA, that they could do the permanent scheduling. It's just not likely to happen in those circumstances. And all of us heard loudly and clearly that Commissioner McCary made the point that the reason we're not focused on natural kratom leaf products is because the body of evidence now has raised issues about what that safety profile is. Principally, I would suspect the FDA dose finding study that concluded that kratom appears to be well tolerated at all dose levels, where you had no serious adverse events after human subjects were administered 12 grams of kratom in a 5-minute period, and the placebo group got the same plant material, not kratom, in a 5-minute period, and you saw the common denominator was a non-serious adverse event of actual people feeling nauseous. That's life. But the FDA is now more enlightened on their evidence and data. So 7-OH doesn't have the benefit of anything like that at this point. And if they are going to develop that evidence, they're going to have to do so under the structure of the Controlled Substances Act, which moves forward. It is always possible that some political play may come here where they will get the government to stand down, but not very likely given the effort that's been put into by HHS and the FDA on this issue. So we come back to the question here that we're really focusing on, and that is what is happening in the state of, let's start with Connecticut. Connecticut, the legislature passed a bill that banned kratom subject to rulemaking that will be done by the Connecticut Office of Consumer Protection, and that hearing is going to be held this Wednesday from 9:30 to 4 p.m. Everyone should sign up to testify. You'll get a couple of minutes or more uh, in order to provide your testimony. They will also accept written testimony up until the 20th. Because of the nature of this hearing, where it's first come, first served, they would not accommodate our request. And by the way, we had to get 15 Connecticut residents to request it. I think we got well over 80. I think that impressed them, and that we have this opportunity. But they will not let us, it's on a first come, first served basis, and they will not let us have panels where we could get our experts in order to provide that. So we will be providing written testimony and provide from those experts and from legislators and from scientists that will inform the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection as to what the safety profile of kratom is versus 7-OH, and let them make their decision on that point. That will then require the governor to affirm whatever decision the department has, and it's a little narrow for them because they've been instructed by the legislature to actually ban it, but the criteria in Connecticut is not matched by the evidence and data of science on kratom in order to demonstrate that it needs to be Schedule 1. So we hope that will be persuasive, and we'll see how it falls out at the end of that discussion. That process will take place over the next month or two, and then we'll be back in the legislative session to have a discussion with the leadership in Connecticut where this bill went through. This bill went through at the last minute, attaching kratom to a common bill that puts dangerous substances on it, and no one paid much attention, much less the leadership, thinking that this was typically what happens, that there was no controversy about this, and of course there is, and we're going to demonstrate that on the hearing. So I encourage everyone to sign up, check your inboxes. If you don't have it, email the AKA, and we'll send you the actual thing. Well, I think we can put it up on the link here. Sign up, testify, so that we can protect natural kratom leaf products as opposed to the 7-OH products. It would not be a surprise to you that the 7-OH people will be doing the same thing. That's their right. They're entitled to do it. They have to make their case, and we'll see how that plays out. In the state of California, what we're experiencing is something that's been on the table for quite a while, and that is that the Department of Health is convinced that they have the authority under their state statute, which allows them to connect to the federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and the guidance provided by the FDA that says that no kratom is eligible for sale as a dietary ingredient, and is their decision that that means all kratom. And clearly that's contrary to what Commissioner McCary is saying. He didn't say we're shutting down all kratom sales. So we have a very tough legal battle. We have a very tough regulatory battle. We're engaged with the Department of Health right now. Our lobbying teams in California are working together with the advocacy groups, which includes the Global Kratom Coalition and the Botanics for Better Health and Wellness. We're working on getting an interim informational hearing at the legislature, which we expect will be scheduled in the next month. That will give us an opportunity, and legislators can call the Department of Health to account for what they're doing. We think that the enforcement is pretty interesting in that there's no consistency to it other than they're seizing products and telling them that they cannot sell them where they do it. But it's not an even keeled kind of thing, not consistent. And so we hope that we're going to be able to make the case that there's enforcement discretion, despite what the Department of Health believes is their statutory authority to do it. We're going to be asking the kratom community to communicate that message to legislative leaders and perhaps to the governor. We have some ongoing discussions right now that will inform us as to what the best approach is from an advocacy perspective and what our chances of success are. And we need to find out when legislative leaders are going to schedule this informational hearing, which will obviously be a very important, significant event in evaluating this case. We're left in limbo here because there are distributors that are being shut down. They're having their products completely confiscated for sale, and they're being cited by the Department of Health. In some cases, those inspectors have literally, as a justification for what they're doing, have handed a copy of the FDA and Kratom webpage as a justification for doing it. So we've informed the FDA at the federal level that the information that's contained on the FDA and Kratom webpage really needs to be substantially modified or taken down because it's being used by these enforcement agencies at the state and local levels in order to do something that was never intended by the FDA to be used in this way. And by the way, there's a real question about whether or not the FDA and Kratom webpage is allowed to do exactly what they're doing under the two legal aspects. One is that in order to draw the kinds of conclusions and make the statements that the FDA has made on the FDA and Kratom webpage, they are required to go through administrative rulemaking under the Administrative Procedures Act, which generally takes about a year of hearings and input. That didn't happen with the FDA and Kratom webpage, and so we think that the outcome of where that webpage is being used by regulatory bodies and by plaintiffs' attorneys in wrongful death actions and by legislators around the country, that is a foreseeable outcome in the FDA's pronouncements about this. And so we think that that's one issue. And then separately, the White House issued an executive order in June of 2025 that requires every federal agency to supply to the White House their conformance with gold standard science. And we know that the evidence and data that is reflected on the FDA and Kratom webpage does not meet the standard for the gold standard science that the White House has asked for. And the FDA is aware of it. They're looking closely at this issue. We've had significant input about what should be modified or the basis for removing that webpage. And when that happens, it will undermine the basis that states like California are using in order to enforce at a state level bans on kratom. So we're working on this. It's a frustrating thing because of the way that they have, in our opinion, gone off the rails by these seizures when they should have been exercising that enforcement discretion that really relates to the serious problems, in our opinion, 7-OH, as opposed to kratom leaf powder. So we've got a lot of work to do in this area. We'll keep you posted and stand by for advice and direction as to what you can and should be doing along the way. So I'm going to go to some of these questions here. I'll get through as many as I can, and we'll see if we can actually get to the bottom line on all this. Adam asked the question, makes the point that a lot of kratom comes through the San Francisco port. Can this be a bit catastrophic? There is no question that the emphasis by a state agency is going to be something that the enforcement agents at Customs and Border Patrol are going to be aware of. There are FDA agents in those ports. They are largely responsible for the review of any imports. There is a kratom import alert that's been out for years. And I think that what you're going to see is that enforcement discretion at the federal level being exercised. And if they suspect that a kratom raw material shipment is either 7-OH, or if that kratom product shipment and raw materials is mislabeled, that's where you'll see that enforcement discretion actually applied. And we're seeing that right now across the country. I think if there is an issue that arises where there is an extraordinary enforcement effort in San Francisco at the port, then I think that there will be an accommodation to that where they'll look to other ports to go through it. Stephen asks, are advocates doing the community a disservice when they share or visit frustrating news articles, giving them the clicks and review revenue they want? Possible. It's a great point, Stephen, but I think the cat's out of the bag on this. We're seeing lots of negative news stories we're trying to counter. There was a story that I thought was atrocious in the Deseret News in Utah. I spoke with the reporter, met with her. She's not willing to back down on it, but she acknowledged that there were gaps in the actual characterization of the products that were being identified by the individuals that were featured in her article. And as an example, one of those individuals was taking a chewable kratom tablet, which turned out to be 7-OH. The other person was taking a mixture of a kava kratom mixture, and it wasn't pure kratom. So lots of issues that need to be analyzed carefully in that context. But the point is that the newspaper should have been at least cognizant of what the actual harm is. Certainly no harm that they could demonstrate to a kava kratom compound being used as opposed to a 7-OH compound. And you can go just to the evidence that's being provided right now at the federal level, and I think you'll see there's a good basis for there to be a fair evaluation of all these issues in the product forms along the way. Chelsea states, so the kratom is banned in Ohio, and when will the ban be enforced? Kratom is not banned in Ohio. The governor did remove his direction to the Board of Pharmacy that they should schedule kratom. He withdrew that recommendation. There was a second executive order just passed that didn't go to the Board of Pharmacy, but rather the Department of Agriculture on banning all intoxicating hemp products. We were worried that that might include kratom. It did not. When the governor was asked at a press conference announcing his intoxicating hemp ban, he did say that he's still looking at kratom. We have a legislator who is going to file the Kratom Consumer Protection Act this coming week, and I think that that will inform the governor about where he should be in terms of the regulatory posture, and the governor himself benefiting from the conversation he had with Secretary Kennedy about what the true purpose of this was, because the governor was misinformed about the posture of the federal government with respect to natural kratom leaf products and 7-OH. Amanda asks, why is a ban even spoken of, knowing to only stop any scientific studies, but also banning it will ultimately ban kratom? Regulation is the key. Amanda, I understand, and you have a hearing here. I know that you are a strong advocate for 7-OH, and the answer is very simple. If there is evidence, scientific evidence and data, then all of you on that 7-OH side would be better served by taking that evidence to the appropriate regulatory authorities rather than pointing your fingers at the AK, which you do on your social media posts. I get it, free country, you can do it, but you misstate the facts. I need to be absolutely clear here that when you're spending time pointing the fingers at the AKA about our advocacy for 7-OH, we've been at this since 2019, and you know it, even though you won't acknowledge it in all of your social media posts. Not you individually, but the group of people that like to chatter about this. You know that there is no evidence provided, and you can't excuse it by saying, oh, well, that's the same thing with kratom. Not true. Evidentially not true. And then the excuse is, well, we've had a billion servings and there's no deaths or adverse events. Again, not true. And so I think that the 7-OH community better served in finding ways to develop the evidence and data that will demonstrate what they should have said in the first place. Take the mistake, learn from it, get off the market, and then build the basis for coming back on the market. And I think that's the bottom line. But to your point, that a Schedule 1 does make it more difficult for scientific studies to be done. But that's the consequence of not doing the evidence and data scientific research prior to market entry and just jumping into the market in order to capture market share. And I'm going to be blunt, misleading kratom consumers into thinking that they were buying a kratom product when in fact it was a highly chemically manipulated and a very powerful, potent product that's 7-hydroxy metrogeny. So I have no sympathy for that when it comes down to it, and I recommend that there be a discussion. And I'm willing to have a civil discussion, but not a roundabout discussion where it's all about AK's terrible, Mac Hattow's terrible, and you guys should be supporting us. That's not going to happen because it's about the science. And taking pot shots at us isn't productive in my opinion. Mike says, I'm worried about Illinois. So am I, by the way, especially after East Peoria possession ban. Two state reps, Sally Turner and Bill Hauser, have applauded the mayor's ban on Facebook, comment about trying to get it out completely. What can we do? We have a substantial presence in Illinois. We are working to get the Illinois KCPA refouled, and now all of this attention on it's going to help get it through. But we've been working with them for several years, and we think that that's going to happen. And a couple of legislators applauding what the mayor did, as uninformed as it was, isn't going to be the saving day for them. And one other point that I think is important, and that is that when we look at these state actions as we go forward here, we need to make sure that we have our advocates out there talking at these local levels. A lot of misinformation out there, and I think that it's important that we get our advocates out there. I know there's fatigue. I know that there's some stigma attached to it, but local advocates are critically important. So Amanda's got a series of things. Amanda, I will say it again. Take and peddle your nonsense back to your group. I get it, and you have a right to do that, but you're not going to waste our time here with what are the facts. And you want to contest that this. I'm gonna answer these as best I can, but understand that you're not doing your cause any favors by playing this game of going after the AKA and challenging us because we've been around a long time. And we continue. We have one thing that we do consistently, and that is we protect consumers. And when I have a 7OH manufacturer, a group of them at the Champ Show, when I ask them directly, what is the difference between Kratom and 7OH? And they say to me, 7OH will knock you on your ass. I'm sorry, Amanda. I have no sympathy for that because that's not what Kratom is supposed to do. In fact, as I was sitting in Ohio legislative session hearing, one of the legislators asked a scientist, "Well, describe Kratom to me." And the scientist said, "The problem with Kratom is it's boring. It doesn't do enough for anyone as a drug seeker to get any attention. And that's why you don't see a lot of attention around pure leaf kratom products. But what does 7OH do? If it knocks you on your ass, then you're in the wrong business. That's my opinion." So Amanda says the 7OH legally has to say an alkaloid derived from kratom. That is not true. This is one of the myths. And Amanda, you're wrong. I heard this argument. I sat in a room with 70 manufacturers of 7OH products, and they peddled that nonsense to me. It is not true. What you have to do is quantify the amount of 7OH that is in your product in the supplement label panel. That's what you have to do. So it has to say 7OH, this level. It does not say that if you have 7OH in the product, you have to label it as kratom. That is untrue. It is wrong, and peddle your nonsense somewhere else where someone might listen to it because it is simply not true. You go on to say, I know 7OH has to say it's from kratom. Not true. Those in smoke shops calling it kratom is the fault. The smoke shops are not the problem here. I don't like the chain in some ways where smoke shops have the stigma associated with them. I get that. But your 7OH people are selling their products there, and that's life. And so kratom people do it. I heard a fabulous analysis from Nora Volkow, who is the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, when she analyzed the argument that many legislators give us that say that, don't you think it's wrong for you to sell this product that has a psychoactive effect in a convenience store and a gas station? And they didn't say smoke shops, but obviously could include. And Dr. Volkow said that given the crisis that we're having now, and given of opioid overdose deaths, and given the fact that kratom can be a lifeline, kratom can be a valuable, potentially valuable harm reduction tool. Why would we stop someone from having access to that product when it isn't harmful, it isn't going to kill anybody? Why wouldn't we let them have access to it? Particularly because in many areas, particularly rural areas, you're not going to have a bed that's available because it's just not there. And then in urban areas, you might have a bed, but you can't afford it. And so what do? You throw these people overboard? Jack Henningfield said to a group of legislators where they were complaining about, this illicit product being marketed in the gas stations, and he said, "Would you not throw a lifeline and a life preserver to a person who is drowning just because that life preserver wasn't the Coast Guard approved?" And that's a great point, right? If the substance isn't going to do you more harm than what you're doing, and the 7OH people have a real high hurdle to overcome when you look at the new evidence that's emerging about its psychoactive effects, as opposed to kratom, the boring product, as opposed to what it is. Now, Amanda's going back to, well, why is metrogeny okay to sell? Why does AK have #1 selling extract company as their approved vendor? It makes no sense. And Amanda, I can't tell you anything that you are now down the rabbit hole of just saying goofy things. And here's the goofy thing. Every manufacturer has an obligation and a duty to have a reasonable basis for evidence and safety to enter the marketplace under conditions of use. And I can tell you, as much as you want to point the finger at the MIT extracts, we at the American Kratom Association have reported those highly concentrated products that do not meet the standard for having been extracted using food grade solvents. That's the difference. And we report them. And then I get this report from Amanda's group and saying, well, prove it to us. Well, you can FOIA the FDA. We've produced more than 130 complaints against kratom manufacturers, 108, I can't remember, 118, I think, or 17, kratom manufacturers who are making illicit therapeutic claims or selling high potency products that don't meet the standard. We do that all the time. And all I get is yappity yap from Amanda and her crowd that say, oh, well, you're not doing this and prove you're doing that. We're out there every day fighting, and they want to shoot, they point their finger and shoot at us with these unfounded allegations about it, and they're doing themselves more harm than good. So, Amanda, that's the last thing I'm going to comment on any of your statements. I've been trying to work with you on your social media posts. It makes no sense because people either claim they're somebody else when they're on there. They won't account for any of this, and they go into this big circle of arguments because they won't accept the responsibility the 7OH manufacturers have. Want to point at the AKA, they want to point at kratom manufacturers, been on the market for a long time, and they want to say, oh, AK supports them. We do not support any illicit product being on the market that doesn't meet the standard under federal law. And the 7OH manufacturers scientists, their top scientists said there wasn't any. And so that's good enough for me. So you show me the evidence and data. Well, better yet, show the FDA your evidence and data, and then you can back on the market. This is nonsense. And you can continue to fight and you can continue to advocate that you want, but I'm done with it because what you're doing is misleading people. You're diverting attention from the real problem. And the real solution here is get the 7OH products off the market, and then we can go back and clean up the marketplace. And I'm willing to be a partner in that, and then make the 7OH people prove what they're doing prior to being on the market anymore. Adam says it seems more important than ever that places like the FDA needs to adjust their online info regarding kratom. Absolutely true. WebMD and Mayo Clinic, we're working hard, and we're getting great responses, by the way, from the FDA staff about making these modifications because this has drawn a lot of interest in when you have the commissioner of the FDA saying publicly we are not targeting natural kratom leaf products, and yet their website does, their webpage does. So we're making good progress there, and we're not going to be diverted from that because the nonsense that the ridiculous arguments being made by the 7OH people along the way, and trying to sell it as, oh, I'm not an advocate for the 7OH. I'm just this person or that person. They're all advocates for the 7OH. They're entitled to it. They at least be honest about it, and that's the bottom line there. Adam says our testimony is all in person or virtual as well. I assume you're talking about Connecticut. And these are going to be online. I suspect that they will be audio, but you might have a camera as well. I just don't know the answer to that. So there you have it. Jennifer asks, is there a recap of this webinar to be available once it's complete for those who couldn't attend? Yes, we put it up on our YouTube channel. I have been listening to the 7OH people, particularly one advocate who claims that we deleted or took down some video of him, and it's because it was absurd. It was because the arguments that he was making and the comments he was making were unhinged. So yeah, we're not accountable for the distribution of material that isn't based on good science, and we're going to continue to work with people along the way. So there you have it. I mean, that's one of those things we can agree to disagree, but we should do so civilly. And we should do it in a way that there isn't this constant circuitous argument about how horrible the AK is, how terrible Mac Haddo is, and about how we've done things that we're accusing them of doing. All of that is just nonsense, and I think, again, counterproductive. Stephen asks, is there anything California residents can do to help the current effort testify? Yes, we're going to give you information about when the informational hearing will be held, and we want people to come who are able to do so to participate in that hearing. But we're also going to launch a very broad-based advocacy effort where we can convey to the appropriate leaders exactly what's needed in California in order to protect this plant. So we're going to work on that along the way. Misty asks, are there certain cities in California or California as a whole? This is a great question. The California Department of Health is asserting the control on kratom statewide. Now, their enforcement that they do has been targeted to specific locations. We understand, and I've not yet gotten the evidence of this yet, but I was told that last week there was a raid on one of the distributors, and they kicked down the door and they threw flashbang cartridges into the facility. That's nuts. But we're going to see if that actually happened. And I think that we're going to work on this as best we can with the appropriate authorities and try to bring some kind of a compromise into this so that we can allow for natural kratom leaf product consumers to have access to those products. And we will continue to advocate for restrictions on 7OH until and if the 7OH people actually want to put their effort into the actual science that's required prior to market entry. And until they're willing to do that, there's no reason to have this ridiculous discussion about, oh, kratom was in the same boat. Wasn't. We have a billion servings and no adverse events. Signaling problem. Now we're seeing it, and they got to be accountable for it. Adam says that there was a great podcast, Sean Ryan, that focused on 7OH. I've seen it. There are two of them. There's a shorter version, a longer version. It's interesting about it. There was some information that not perfectly presented in my opinion, but I got it, and uh, I think that the potential exists for someone, an influencer in that podcast world, as Adam suggests, might be a good person to reach out to Governor Newsom. I think that would be very helpful as we go forward. It's certainly on the agenda of our PR group that is evaluating what the next options are based on what we're hearing from the our lobbying team on the ground and legislators. Mike points out, I'm worried about Illinois, especially after the East Peoria possession ban. Again, same problem. I've already discussed that. We're supportive of it. We're going to be pushing back hard in Illinois in terms of how we're doing. Christopher asked, who are the legislators behind the kratom ban in Connecticut? There were two. Sorry, I can't remember their names offhand. Misinformed. That's all they were. They were told by people that they should be pushing this, and uh, and I think that hopefully we'll be able to work with them in the new legislative session. We've had discussions with the legislative leadership, and I think they're very interested in getting this right. When a state adjacent to them in Rhode Island rescinds a ban, repeals it, and replaces it with the KCPA. That should be the right public approach. Jennifer asked, when we give public comment in Connecticut, we're mainly voicing our concerns about them adding it to the scheduled list and why we know it shouldn't be scheduled. Is that correct? Yes. We want them to understand that the evidentiary standard and the criteria for scheduling, meaning that the product, and it says it in their state statute, if I remember correctly, the product has a psychoactive effect, including hallucinations, neurological impairment, that kind of thing. Kratom doesn't produce that. And so we're going to be pushing hard for that. Garrison asked, what's the status of Kratom in North Carolina? We're alive and kicking. Our lobbyists are working hard with them, and we're working to move forward with that. Jordan asked, as a vendor in California, what would be the next step? Should we be looking to relocate, or am I jumping the gun? I hope you're jumping the gun. This is a concern, and I tell every business person, consult your attorneys, be ready for this fight. If the health department shows up and puts a tape around your products, you're cooked for that period of time. But they're options, and we're going to continue to work on those, hopefully to get to a good resolution. And we're working as quickly as we can going forward. Um, Yelena asked, is it currently illegal to possess kratom in California? The authority under the Department of Health is about the sale of kratom products. It is not illegal to possess kratom in the state of California, as I understand it. So you can be reassured you're not going to get arrested. Now, there might be some localities that have passed kratom bans in the state that say you cannot possess them in your state. That's a different issue, but statewide, that's not the case. Brian says, you sort of touched on this, but how long do you think 7OH products will be available in the market? The connection between the two products potentially dire for kratom. It is a concern that when you get a product that comes in and marketed itself as kratom, which the 7OH industry deliberately did, under this ridiculous premise, oh, we have to call it kratom. That is so nonsensical, it's not even funny. They have to list as an ingredient the level, to quantify what the level of 7OH is. They don't have to call it metrogeny. They don't have to call it kratom, and yet that's one of the false arguments that are used by these, and I'll call them extremist advocates for 7OH, because it doesn't make common sense and it's not true. But it does raise the specter of misunderstanding by public officials. So we've redoubled our efforts. We're working hard to make sure that it's true. If the DEA introduces a publication, a notice in the Federal Register that says that they're going to temporarily schedule 7OH, 30 days after the date of publication, 7OH becomes illegal across the country. That's the bottom line. And it was illegal to produce or to possess. So that's what you have to watch for once that gets done. And I think they've been a holding pattern a little bit because of the shutdown. They were in the middle of evaluating it. There's lots of information they're receiving from the 7OH people too that they will evaluate. Leah asked, is there any metabolite that has been banned in the U.S. that the parent compound wasn't also banned? Yes, there is an analog act with specific legal thresholds that compare two substances where the parent substance and an analog of it. And Leah, I can tell you that the courts do not favor anybody trying to come in and combine the two. The standard is pretty clear as to what the underlying substance is and the analog produced, in this case 7-OH, from it. And so that's another false argument that's being launched by the 7-OH industry. And I can tell you that our lawyers have dissected this as carefully as anyone can do, and there will not be a conflation of the actual kratom product to a 7-OH product because of the chemical manipulation that occurs in order to create the 7-OH product. And they can act any way they want. The 7-OH people are guilty as sin on this issue because they didn't have the evidence and data that they needed to be on the marketplace. And their own top scientist admitted it. And any recovery argument they want to make simply doesn't hold water along the way. If they are interested in a serious discussion about the science, they should say that instead of all these ridiculous arguments that are being thrown around here. Misty said, is the AK doing 7-OH damage control? If you can't see that, you're stuck in the, so she says the AK is doing 7-OH damage control. You're stuck in the 7-OH fog. Uh, there is a tremendous amount of money that is being, revenue that's been the result of the marketing of 7-OH products. They are more powerful. They have an intoxicating euphoric high that it generates. The power of 7-OH is well documented in the science. So yeah, they've got a lot of money, and that money will dry up. And I think you can look at the evidence of the people that are in this business when they were confronted with the potential ban. Their immediate reaction was, "Well, let's just go to Sudandoxil then, or let's go to MGM-15." I mean, this is just because it's about a money game. I don't begrudge them; it's a capitalist society, but that's the fact. And so those people that are in the 7-OH space that want to somehow elevate the 7-OH manufacturers as being this great paragons of virtue, they're not. And when you have the one of the major manufacturers of 7-OH raw materials who publicly in a social media post responds to a distributor of 7-OH who asks him whether or not, based on what the announcement by the FDA and HHS on 7-OH was, should he remove his products from the marketplace because of the safety concerns and the imminent threat that the FDA and HHS says that it poses to consumers. And that individual who's a major marketer of the raw materials says, "Oh no, you couldn't get better advertising than this." That's not someone who's concerned about public safety. That's someone who's looking at the dollar that's coming in. And I think it's really hard to contend with that when you look at, they want to attach virtue to themselves when there really is no virtue there. Jan asked, where are we with Massachusetts? The legislature is moving, but not quickly enough. We are seeing local bans, but we have a local ban team that is making some victories there as well. So we're going to continue to work at the local level as best we can, and in conjunction with that in Massachusetts. And I think the fact there are localities that are moving in an uninformed way, that will be the catalyst for a speedier action in the Massachusetts legislature. And so there you have it. So Amanda, I'm going to say this. Amanda says, "I'm not going after you or the AK at all, and don't lump me in with the others, please." Amanda, I will take that at face value. Then stop participating in those beat up sessions. Stop being a catalyst for the discussion. Stop being the major one of them. And you are a major voice. There's no question. I offered to sit down and talk, and you were going to be the person that organized those others, and you never did it. And I gave times. I'm willing to have these discussions, reasonable civil discussions, but those discussions on your social media platforms are anything but reasonable. And that's the problem we run into. So I take you at face value. You're trying to do it, and I would suggest your heart's in the right place, but your feet are in the wrong place. And so I think you need to look through on that. Glenn says he got banned from Kratom Sub on Reddit for saying the exact same thing you did. Well, that's no big deal. There are going to be people that have different opinions, and I respect that. I think the opinions have to be grounded in facts, and you can't make it up. And that's too often what the 7-OH people do on the fly. I can't. I'm not kidding you. If you go and look at the various Facebook community groups that are advocating for 7-OH and what they're saying, it's like they have been completely brainwashed by this view that you can't ban 7-OH, and therefore you are allowed to say anything that they want, to attack anybody that they want. Not just me, not just the AK. They'll attack anybody that contradicts their saying. So there you have it along the way. Um, so there, Glenn, thank you for your comment. I get it. And I'll get banned from 7OH too, or from the Reddit subgroup. Um, Adam says, what if their enforcement is deemed legal? And that I would suggest that you're talking about California. They believe they're legal now. The question is whether they can exercise enforcement discretion, or if there ends up being a legal case. That takes too long, and that's just a fact. We're going to try to do it through the legislative process, and I think that we'll have a better chance there. But we're all hands on deck working. Dion says, please be sure to include me in the California advocates. Dion is one of the most magnificent advocates that I have ever met in my life. She is such a has a testimony that's so compelling about the value that Kratom can provide for her, and every one of us is in her debt. If you should write her and say thank you, because I have been in the last 10 years that I've worked on this topic, almost 10 years that I worked on this topic. I've run into a lot of people who are passionate, who have great personal testimonials, but none matches or exceeds what Dion does. And her commitment to it, she burns up the email lines with me all the time. And I'm probably the not as appreciative as I should be, and I'm oftentimes not as responsive as I should be, because I get so many emails and I'm on the road all the time. But I can tell you that this woman is one of the most magnificent people to ever walk the face of the earth, and we appreciate everything that she's done. Um, Dan says, any reports on Kratom products shipped by way of UPS being seized in California? I've not heard that yet. It wouldn't surprise me. Some of the overnight vendors are looking at Kratom anyway, because of the Kratom import alert, but I've not heard specifically about USPS shutting that down yet. Um, Janice says, do you know if there will be a schedule for testimony in Connecticut or workarounds for those who will not be able to attend until later in the day? Unfortunately, um, they it's a first come, first served. So I tried to pitch them to allow people to do what you suggested. Not going to happen, but they have written testimony open until the 20th. So you should go and register. It lets you pick and choose between whether you want to speak or whether you want to submit testimony. So you should make sure you sign up for that, and you have until the 20th uh, to do that. Misty says, is Kratom considered a precursor for 7-OH? No, legally it's not. There will be some who try to make that argument, but we've been analyzing with our scientific team and our legal team, and they're not going to be able to make that going forward. Craig says East Peoria is not a ban yet, and Craig's a great advocate that works with one of the vendors there, and there he points out that he's reaching out to the city there and advising them that they are inaccurately interpreting the information that was provided by the Secretary Kennedy and FDA Commissioner McCary. And so hopefully we can have an input. And Craig points out that the ordinance is only up for first reading. Great information. Thanks for doing that. Anthony says, as an online retailer in California, I have to stop selling my kratom powder. That's yet to be determined. All we know is that the California Health Department has issued an advisory and that they are conducting specific enforcement actions on distributors. Until you get visited, and check your attorney with your attorney on how you should approach this. But I think that in fact, the department has a high hill to climb here. We'll have to keep working with them. Jordan says, how can 7-OH products say kratom extract when it is not? The nuances of how you characterize what kratom is. No 7-OH manufacturer can legally market a 7-OH product as a kratom extract. They cannot call it a kratom product. They like doing it because they want to dupe, potentially dupe, in my opinion, these kratom consumers into upscaling into 7-OH, which is a completely different product that is not doesn't have the effects, that boring effect along the way. So I think this is just where we are. And we have to fight back with this misinformation being promoted by a 7-OH industry that's desperate in order to maintain their market position by trying to say all these ridiculous, completely inaccurate, and untruthful things that they have to call their products kratom. It's just silliness. Mike says, how confident do you feel that federal 708 scheduling won't escalate to full leaf ban and scheduling? I am very confident of that based on the conversations I've had with HHS staff and FDA staff that they are not, and I take at his word that Commissioner McCary is not focused on raw kratom leaf products. And the evidence of that is in the evidence and data submitted by the FDA to the DEA, and it is focused on 7-OH, not kratom, the pure kratom leaf products. So that's the bottom line. So there's no action item that's currently before the DEA on this issue, and unless they get a recommendation, they wouldn't evaluate it along the way. Christopher said, "What is the primary message to communicate in Connecticut hearing?" So, in my opinion, there are two things that are important. One is that the statute in Connecticut requires that there be an evidentiary finding that kratom has this hallucinogenic and neurological impairment and is a significant has a significant addiction liability. The science directly contradicts that, and that's the message. And they will get all of this science, by the way, from us. And I think that the advocates can simply say that you need to review the science to see that the criteria embedded into Connecticut law does not match the scientific evidence with respect to the addiction liability and the psychoactive compounds and their effects that are in a kratom leaf product. Um, Misty says, I've never seen anyone say 708 saved their lives at legislative hearing. Just saying, that's a good point. Not that they won't. I think that people can have experience, real experience, with a product, and they can responsibly use any product, and they could make a claim about it, and that's something that is in legislative parlance is anecdotal. We have to combine that with the evidence and data that's available right now, and and that's just a really tragic circumstance when someone has an experience with the 7-OH product that they didn't anticipate, that they were misled about. And so I think that's the different factor with kratom. And I think that, and when you look at the scientific data, one of many of the scientific articles that are available right now includes an article done by Dr. McCurdy, where he indicated that based on the research that they conducted, there's a ceiling effect of kratom metrogenine as you take it. In other words, no matter how much you take, it's not gonna hurt you, but it also won't give you any greater effect than what you actually experience with a lower dose of the kratom material. So I think that that's the kind of focus that when we evaluate this, that the scientists are looking at, what the public policymakers are looking at. So I think that we have real opportunity here that comes from this experience where so much attention has been given to 7-OH to educate public policymakers and regulators about what the true characterization of kratom is, and as opposed to 7-OH. Leah said, is there a timeline to lift the import alert or at least soften it? The wording is terrible. Leah, you're absolutely right. We've been working with the FDA to revise the language on the import alert or to remove the import alert. They're not yet at that position, but I think we're getting closer and closer. And when we see the realignment of the language in the FDA and Kratom webpage, then I think that we'll see a subsequent decision that's made about the import alerts, and maybe we modify those as well. The AKA completely supports the import alert that deals with the kratom raw materials that are imported into the United States for which there is a specific illegal therapeutic claim associated with it. Now, the difference we have is that we don't see any raw materials coming in that make any therapeutic claims. It is a subsequent manufacturer who produces a product and then they make a claim, and that's where the enforcement action by the FDA should take place because those are illegal. You can't say that your product is going to cure fibromyalgia or you're going to have any significant therapeutic benefit. That's an illegal therapeutic claim, which we think the import alert was designed to catch. But they should only in that case interdict a finished product with a labeling that's associated with it. Same is true for the standard import alert because it really isn't about the material that's coming into the United States being an imminent threat to the American public because the FDA's own dose finding study concluded that it is a well, kratom is well tolerated at all dose levels. Their conclusion. So it's difficult for them to maintain the position that they have, except for their focus on products. If there is a kratom product that's on the marketplace that makes itself a dietary ingredient or dietary supplement making structure function claims that require an evaluation by the FDA, then all they have at it. That's something that we would support. But we need to get rid of that import alert as it's currently constituted. Jen asked, in an attempt to save access to kratom leaf, would the AK ever take the stance of only fighting for natural leaf kratom in powder crushed leaf form and ditch extracts altogether? Jen, that is a something that we're doing. We currently oppose any extract product in the marketplace that is extracted using solvents that are not approved by the FDA as food grade solvents, which limits the potency of those products, gives a standardized dose, and removes all microbials. So we're already at that position, and I know people would like to shoot at. There is a substantial customer base within the kratom community that says that extracts benefit them for the reasons I've just articulated. And then there are people that say, oh, well, the extracts are the problem, when in fact, as long as they're properly extracted, then they should be allowed in the marketplace. It is the highly concentrated, improperly extracted kratom products that should be removed. And we're not going to be the person that says, oh, we're only going to have, a kratom product that has, let's say, as an example, 10 milligrams of metrogeny. Not going to happen. And so I think we all need to reset our views on this and recognize that if the manufacturer has that reasonable basis for safety, that they should be allowed in the marketplace under the labeling conditions for the use along the way. Leah says, in California, that notice says kratom is illegal. How can that be without an actual law? They have the authority under what's called the Sherman Law, under California law, to take the action they're taking, in their view, under the California Health Code. They believe they have the right to do it. And we need to contest that both from a legal perspective, difficult to do because of the broad language in the California statute, but more importantly, to interdict it with the legislature, and in the interim, encourage the health department to only use their enforcement discretion to go after the problematic problems in the marketplace right now. M. Gray says, please discuss the new analogs like MGM-15, MGM-16, and also the 7-OH vendor, bulk 7-OH, who switch a psychedelic analog with their pills. They sent out products from their sister company that was mixed up in the fridge and made customers trip. I don't understand all of that. I know there's some detail around it. I will say generally that when you get to MGM 15 and 16, they are totally chemically formulated. They are, in fact, illegal chemical substances, and they should be removed from the marketplace immediately. And I think that the DEA is going to take action against those if they haven't already along the way. The more complex issue, of course, is focused on the 7-OH manufacturers that take a compound, a metabolite, that it only occurs when you have a drying of the kratom leaves after they're harvested, and then the natural oxidization process that continues throughout the life of the kratom material until it's ingested. Now, never along that way, and I've heard the 7-OH people say, oh, you don't understand, the kratom is a part of the plant material. It is not. 7-OH does not occur naturally in the plant. And over in Southeast Asia, when the plants are picked, they're usually chewed on right away, or they're put into a boiling water, made into a tea over a 3 or 4 hour period. And that's why you see a substantially different profile of the products that are sold in Southeast Asia versus the United States. And they like to take the big gray paint and spread over that 7-OH people do. And they're wrong. And they're wrong. They want to justify, oh, well, all products have 7-OH in them. It is true that there is, as Commissioner McCary appropriately says, that there are trace amounts of 7-OH that naturally occur, meaning that they're part of the oxidization process along the way. So somebody needs to tell me how they can justify the absolutely absurd position taken by the 7-OH people, saying that they can take the low levels, the trace amounts of 7-OH that exist in kratom raw material that's imported into the United States, and months after it has been harvested and gone through their process, still has only trace amounts of 7-OH. And then they make the argument, but that 7-OH is ingested and it hits the liver, the same as a 7-OH product does. Now, you tell me if it makes any sense that you take a metrogenine, majority metrogenine product that has trace amounts of 7-OH and you ingest it and how it hits your liver versus a 7-OH product which has been chemically manipulated to the majority of being 7-OH that hits your liver like a freight train. That's the difference. And they want to say, oh, it's the same thing. It is not the same thing. It's a little bit like people. I had a 7-OH guy tell me that that you like to say that kratom is okay no matter what, and I don't say that, but that's with the accusation. And all we're saying is that 7-OH is just a natural derivative of it, which it's not. It is an oxidization process that can be natural, but when you spike it with a chemical that you use in shocking your backyard pool, that tells you a lot. Now their new claim is, well, we've developed a new oxidization process that isn't the same as using those backyard pool chemicals. Okay, what does it produce? A majority product of 7-OH as opposed to metrogeny. So if you were to take a glass of milk and you poured 1 ounce of milk into a 20-ounce glass and then put 19 ounces of Everclear 190 proof and the person consumed that, and 20 ounces is a standard serving for people with drinks like that in the United States, and you were to then drink it and you die, would you call it a milk overdose? Of course not. Same is true with 7-OH. When you upset the actual proportion of the product that is 7-OH, which is chemically manipulated, hits your liver like a freight train, hits your body like a freight train, gives you that euphoric high, the one that knocks you on your ass, that tells you the whole story. And that's why I think uh, that there's a problem here. Adam says, do they actually read the written testimony? Well, that's one of the great mysteries of life. I think that the public record is substantial, and I think that if you submit your written testimony, and we're going to submit all kinds of information, if you can't make that hearing, you should definitely submit your written testimony. And I think the collective, even if it isn't individualized to them listening or reading to every word, that will still have an impact going forward. Heidi points out that East Peoria used false information presented at the Monticello from a treatment facility marketing materials with false information. She wants Craig to connect with her. So Craig, you need to contact me and I'll connect you with Heidi. You can work together in East Peoria. This is an interesting situation where you get some, let's call them well-intentioned people that are trying to protect the public, and they pick up information from the Mayo Clinic or they pick up information from a treatment facility, both of whom have a different agenda than just protecting consumers. I think that's really important as we move forward. Jeff says that you and John Shinholzer are my heroes. Thank you. I'm not in the same camp as John Shinholzer. John Shinholzer is one of the most magnificent people. He is a Marine. He criticized me for calling him a former Marine because he's an old guy like me. But once you're a Marine, apparently you're always a Marine. There ain't no such thing as a former Marine. John is a warrior. And if I'm going to pick the people that I want in my foxhole when the enemy's coming after us, John's my best pick. So I agree with you, Jeff. I think that John Shinholzer is my hero too. He's a great man and does a great job. Will the recent FDA decision on the compound that was challenged by the Natural Products Alliance helpful to us? It helps to build the narrative about how the FDA should properly characterize dietary ingredients. So to that extent, it helps. It has no precedential value at this point, but it helps us to do it. Dion asks, she has an honest question about the difference between a kratom-derived product and a kratom extract. The kratom extract product removes all microbials from the kratom powder, and that's particularly important when we get into discussions about the small batch manufacturers in the United States that don't test their products because it's expensive to do that, and they really don't have the money to be in the marketplace that way. They rely upon shipments from friendly farmers in Indonesia, for example, and they repackage it in their facilities and they sell it. And having this problem with matching against a standard for testing that kind of thing is very difficult. I've said it before, that's not a good model for us, and that those products should not be on the market if they're not willing to subject themselves to GMP. But a kratom extract product also has to be carefully formulated and extracted using only food grade solvents so that you don't increase the power of the metrogenine alkaloid. And if you do that, then you're illegal, and we support removing those products from the market. Um, and Misty said, if 7-OH is made from kratom is over 1 billion doses, wouldn't that create deforestation? That's a great point. I think that there is a significant amount uh, of argument to be made about the amount of kratom raw material that it takes to produce a 7-OH product. But I think that the more critical issue for us is the chemical change that is done by the catalyst that they use. Garrison asked a great question. Is Big Pharma playing a role in scheduling kratom? I don't think there's evidence of that being the case. There may be individual pharma companies that are working on specific pain relief medications that don't like the potential for natural kratom leaf products to compete against them. So there may be some of that in play, but I don't think that it's a major issue with big pharma. And as I have walked the halls of the U.S. Congress and heard from legislative offices, I can tell you the biggest complaints come from the kratom danger awareness people who are peddling their nonsense and inaccurate information. And now, of course, we have some 7-OH doing the same thing in a different vein. And then you have these people that purport to be substance abuse clinics that are doing it. I don't hear that pharma is objecting to what we're doing. So we watch it, and I think would be smart to do so, but not really the problem we have right now. Uh, SLJ asked, how do consumers identify properly extracted products? It's difficult to identify. I agree. I think that there are two issues here. One is that we have a GMP program that you can go to and look to see what companies have subjected themselves to the AK GMP program, which requires that an independent auditor evaluate the manufacturing facility. And they have to show that they meet and comply with good manufacturing standards. That is not an endorsement of the product itself. And so the question that you need to ask when you evaluate a product on the extraction method is what solvents did they use? And this is the consumer beware, and we encourage it going forward that you look at it. Uh, Jordan asked, so is kratom technically illegal in California? It's a gray area right now, according to the Department of Health, following what the FDA says. The kratom cannot be legally marketed as a dietary ingredient or dietary supplement. Okay, if it's not labeled as a dietary ingredient or dietary supplement, and it's in a food, then what pre-market authority does the FDA have? None. And why should the California have it any differently? But it is a gray area. And right now, if you listen to the Department of Health in California, that is their position that kratom currently being sold is you can't sell it. And so I think that's important. Misty points out that Monticello banned all kratom because of 7-OH. We're seeing more and more of that where there's a conflation of the two. We sat in hearings in Texas and we heard the sponsor of the ban bill in Texas complain, and we heard witnesses from the law enforcement community complain that they can't tell the difference, that their officers don't have enough time nor the training or expertise to walk into a store and see what one kratom product is and another kratom product and tell the difference. And I think that it's simpler than they think, but it's still a challenge. And so we continue to educate these policymakers to explain to them that there actually is a more streamlined way of identifying these products. The most important one is the product registered with the state, compliant with the state statute, and is there a published list of those products? And then actually a law enforcement officer doesn't have to guess. They just look it up. And they have that with hemp and all kinds of consumer products that are on lists like that. And so I think that's the easy, simple solution, but they want to complicate it because they have an agenda that's different than ours. And so I think that's the bottom line of the thing that we're working at. I'm going to close here now. Thank you to all of you who participated. in this. We appreciate the support. We appreciate the candid discussion. And I know that I was tough tonight on the 7OH people. And I am there because it is just like it's like a big the Pillsbury Doughboy. You hit one area to address concerns, and then it's somewhere else. It's like whack-a-mole. There's never a way to convince a person who believes that 708 should be on the marketplace and then try to point fingers at the AK or the Kratom vendors and say, well, you're just as bad as we are. That is not a defense that makes any common sense, but it's one that's desperate and it's one that is inaccurate and I don't think has any place in this discussion. And that's why you heard some of my frustration about this because I've tried. I've spent hours on some of these chat boards trying to have these discussions and it just keeps going in a big circle and you have people and I know it to be true people who claim to be a legitimate person. They're just a bot. They're someone using a fake name making the same arguments. They're the same people and you get what I would characterize as completely irrational behavior, profanity riddled accusations, and they think it's okay and that we should all of us should be accepting of it because they say it. I personally accept that in this country we have free speech. You can say whatever you want to say. It doesn't impose upon me an obligation that I have to believe everything you say, nor do you have to believe everything I say. And I think that's where the common denominator is that when public officials, when departments of health and departments of agriculture make evaluations about where we are, they make decisions. And when you look at the legislative record of the American Kratom Association, which is roundly discarded by the 7OH people, we have 18 states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We have we have regulations that started in 2019 that said that a kratom product that is registered in a state where KCPA is in effect cannot exceed more than 2% of the overall fraction of the compounds in that product of 7-OH. We did that in 2019. These products didn't come onto the market until 2023, at the end of 23. And so at this point, it is completely ridiculous for the 7-OH people to be throwing their bombs at us, saying that we're just in this because we're protecting the kratom marketplace, and this is a turf war. It's hardly a turf war. It is a safety war. It is about protecting consumers. And these people that want to exploit the consumer marketplace by telling consumers, oh, this is a kratom product, when the majority compound of that product is 7-OH. That is deceptive marketing at its finest. And they think it's justified because, oh, it makes me feel good because I feel the effects of it. And I'm a libertarian, and I think everybody should be able to do what they want to do. There are limits. And that's why there are laws in place that require these products to conform with safety regulations, because we don't have an absolute right to place a product on the marketplace. Consumers should have wide latitude in order to make decisions about their health and well-being, and I'm a believer in that. And I think that if a company meets the threshold of having that reasonable basis for safety under conditions of use, there should be little else done about it in the marketplace that would somehow interfere with the consumer's right to do that. But it's an important threshold question, and you can't excuse the failure to meet that obligation because you just don't like the rule or because you violated it. And I think that's the key part. The American Kratom Association will continue to be committed to what we are doing now. We're working in as many states as we can. We're fighting the battle in Florida, where we think that the Florida Department of Agriculture is enforcing the AG's rule without the kind of specifics that it needs to. They're going too far. We're working with them. We've built credibility there over years, and we're going to continue to work there. All of us should be pulling in the same direction on these issues and protect the right of consumers to consume and have access to safe kratom products. Not the nonsense that's out there now, just because someone can cook it in the lab and they can use pull shock chemicals and make something that will knock you on your ass. Not the right kind of approach, and certainly not one that we at the AK support. So we're going to continue to work for it. I reaffirm my deep appreciation for those advocates who have, like Dion and like Misty and like so many others that are on this. I think Jordan is producing a documentary on kratom that's been in the works for a couple of years. It's these kinds of advocates, these people who I saw shoulder to shoulder in 2016 and continuing forward to today that are protecting our community. They're fighting for it. They're legitimate warriors along the way. And these people that want to come in at the end of the day and say, oh, well, I found this product that gives me a buzz or gives me a greater effect, and therefore I'm going to, you can't call me anything but a Kratom warrior. You're not. I look to people that have integrity in terms of the commitment to a specific advocacy platform, and I've seen them. And as much as I said that John Shinholzer was my guy that I wanted in the foxhole, we got a pretty big foxhole, and we got a lot of people like Dion and like Jordan and like Misty and people like them that are in there fighting with us, and Jennifer and all these others. I can't name everybody, but I can tell you we're an army of people that are fighting. And but for you, we wouldn't be in the position we are today to be able to credibly defend the Kratom marketplace for safe Kratom products to be easily accessible to Kratom consumers. So thanks to everyone. Appreciate it. We'll put this video up on our YouTube channel tomorrow, and you can circulate it. So thanks very much, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.